It's great to be here tonight, and we just were up in West Memphis, Arkansas yesterday at the big academies of West Memphis, and we got to speak to a lot of kids about life and about the friend who will never leave you or forsake you. So that's always a great time. I've spoken, I guess, now to thousands of kids. My books, believe me, when I was growing up and when I was going through all this stuff, I never dreamed that one day I'd write about it in a fictional way, Michael in the books as me, and never dreamed I'd do that and become an author. But I've spoken to thousands of kids, as I said, because the books are used in many, many high schools, middle schools, a lot of colleges. Mississippi State is using Deputy, and they're the first now in a series. They're using it in a history class this fall, and ICC made Ghost of Shade of Pale required reading for all English students. And when I first got the first call from an English teacher telling me they were using it, I was thrilled, but it scared me to death that English teachers were looking closely at my writing. I figured they're going to pull out the red pen and say, underline my grammatical errors and my misspelling or whatever. But they really like the books, and that really pleases me. They're written as literature and like novels I grew up on, and they don't contain any of the things that folks wanted me to put in the books. You know, profanity and graphic intimacy and all that kind of stuff. And they told me when they read my first section of my first book, some in the industry said, well, you know, this is pretty good. I said, but you need some neon in your books. And I said, neon? I said, how do you define neon? And so they sent me some of my writing back, just peppered and dusted with the worst four-letter words you can imagine. And I said, no. I said, I can't do that. I won't do that. I said, I'm writing books that will scare you because scary things happen to me. But I'm writing books that if my mother and my English teacher were still living, I wouldn't be ashamed for them to read my books. And so I said no to language and sex, and they wanted to copy it in the publishing industry. They wanted to copy whatever was selling big last week, whatever was hot. Vampires were hot then, and so they said, well, okay. They said, could you add some vampires to your story? I said, well, hey, we met some pretty bad people when I was undercover and everything, but I don't think anyone was certified vampires. And then they said, and you need to stop mentioning God so much. You're going to offend somebody. I said, let me see if I understand. Profanity good, sex good, vampires good, but God not good? I said, no, I won't do any of that. And so we stuck to our guns, and the books have become pretty popular. And before I get into some of the stories, I'll tell you that Judy and I we got a call from Hollywood to come to Hollywood. And Criminal Minds, I don't know if y'all ever watched that show, been on for like 13 years, and they said, we read your manuscript to Ghost of Shade of Pale, come to Hollywood, we want to represent you. So Judy and I loaded up the Murano and took off out on I-40 and drove across America and did book signings and went out there to Hollywood. And I want to tell y'all, if y'all don't know, there's no shortage of people to witness to in Hollywood. And they didn't know quite what to make of me. Here I was, this conservative Christian from Mississippi, so you imagine what they already thought about me. And then when they found out that I actually had core values that I believed in, and that the books were commissioned to me by the Lord to tell my story and his story of second chances and redemption. And when they found out that I wouldn't barter all that away and sell my soul for a pot of gold, I told people, they looked at me like Scotty had just beamed me down from the Starship Enterprise. They'd never met anybody like that in Hollywood. But you know, we met some nice people out there and met some great Christians. And it's not easy to be a Christian in Hollywood. But there were some strong folks that we met out there, and a lot of secular people, you know, they didn't get it, but they liked the writing, and so we signed a contract out there. And when Judy and I were going to an insider TV interview that Criminal Minds had arranged for me in Beverly Hills, we were driving through Beverly Hills, you know, gawking at all the iconic images around us, like the two bumpkins from Mississippi that we really are. And I looked at Judy and I said, Judy, I said, we are the Beverly Hillbillies. all we need is Granny up on top in the rocket chair, you know. And so it's been a big adventure, and everything that people have told us could not happen has happened, because God has been going before me and opening doors as only He can, and closing some I was convinced I must go through. No, and wherever He sends me is 100 times better than where I wanted to go. And the experts always, they come back to me and scratching their heads, and they say, well, we told you that could never happen. They never let you in, and so forth and so on. We're the experts. How did that happen? I said, well, there's only one expert I listen to. He says, go, I go. He says, do, I do. And that's our plan, and we stick to it. And Judy and I seed books like the First Disciples seeded churches. This is our little corner of the Great Commission. And we get cards and letters from all over the country. People saying the books have changed their lives, and it's very humbling. It's all God, not me. And some of those are so tender that come in. I'll admit to y'all that I sit at my desk sometimes and I cry when I get them. And as I told somebody on a worldwide interview I did the other night, I said, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I said, real men cry for Jesus. So anyway, my story is, usually when people have read all my books and they meet me, they say, we got two questions. Number one, how are you still alive? And number two, you must be 150 for all this to happen to one human being. I said, well, I feel like it some days. And so, but I was finishing up at Ole Miss about 47 years ago or so, and I interned as a deputy sheriff here in Mississippi under Bill Mitchell. If any of y'all remember Fiddlin' Bill Mitchell, he's a great fiddle player. And a lot of wild and woolly things happened there. Elvis came down to get a badge from Bill, and that was exciting. But one of the premier criminals here in this area at that time, who I won't name, he's deceased anyway now, but a lot of folks who've been around here for a long time will probably remember his name. But he came in and counted out, like $1,000 to Bill on his table in cash, and said, that's what you'll get every week if you look the other way, and let me run wide open. Now, 48 years ago, $52,000 or so tax-free, that was big money. But Bill threw him out, and when he did, then they bombed Bill's house. Here they put a bomb in his house and did a lot of damage to his house, and burned his little daughter's monkey, burned it alive. They kept it in a storage room when they were all gone during the daytime, and if there had been somebody there when they did it, it could have been really bad. And so then a raid was mounted on the syndicate headquarters here, and the sheriff was not happy. He was not a happy man. And so saw a lot of stuff there, and that's all in Deputy, the book Deputy. But I graduated Ole Miss, and then just as the first drug wars were being declared by Richard Nixon, and they created the DEA and then spinoff agencies at local levels, state levels, like ours was the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. So I decided, well, that must be the place for me. Young and naive, thought I knew everything, didn't know anything. Thought the world was a nice, neat, and ordered place, where right was right and wrong was wrong. The good guys wore white hats and the bad guys wore black hats, and all I had to do was ride into town like Dodge, and slay dragons and rescue damsels in distress. But I found out right away it was not a neat and ordered place. There was danger and treachery and betrayal all around. And sometimes some of the people who would put you in harm's way were people who were supposed to be your allies. And some of them actually wore badges. A lot of people wearing masks then. And that was even before the Antifa. Now it's running around the streets of America. Incredible. Sonny and I were talking about that earlier today. So I went into the Bureau. There weren't many of us in the early days, and so we worked solo undercover. And I was working, I saw a lot of things back then. I saw a lot of things in the new book that's coming out I talk about. I went back and amplified on Ghost of Shade of Pale to show how we kind of got to where we are now. The communists we ran into then, who wanted to pull down the crosses and burn the Bibles, and they were bombing the Capitol, and they were bombing the Pentagon, and we locked horns with some of those people because the drug crowd and the radicals, a lot of that overlapped, and some of it was they were financing each other in some cases, and they got my name and got a description of me. And during one drug deal, when I was counting the money out like this, the drug dealer said, "Oh man, I got to warn you about this guy. He's hurting a lot of people." And I said, "Oh yeah, who is it?" And he said, "His name's Merle Temple." And I almost stopped counting, but I didn't. I kept myself going. I said, "Oh yeah, what does he look like?" And he described me to a T, and my car that was right over my shoulder out the open front door. And so those guys could have gotten me killed very easily. So we bring that forward and try to explain to people kind of how we got to here, in the new book that's coming out, and how a lot of those radicals put on suits and ties, and then they took over our institutions, our universities, our media, and some of our public schools in some cases, and and the labor unions and the foundations, and so they began to quietly undermine America while the rest of us were, I won't say slumbering necessarily, but we were out trying to live our lives, raise our families, and everything. And so I try to explain that. But when I was working undercover down in South Mississippi, we had a heroin deal set up, and that was supposed to be on a Saturday night or on Friday night. We were at like a river party I'd gone down to and I had my weapon, my .357 Magnum, was hidden up underneath the seat. And these guys showed up a day early, and demanded to do the deal that night. And I wasn't ready, and just me and an informant I had. But they insisted on it, and they were kind of dangerous guys. One had just gotten out of Angola prison, and if you knew anything about Angola, if you can survive a stretch in Angola, you're pretty tough guy, because it was the worst prison, I think, probably in those days, probably the worst in America. And so he insisted on driving. So we drove that night. We drove to where the highway ended, and then the blacktop ended, and the dirt road ended somewhere down around the Mississippi-Louisiana border. And then we got on this kind of cow path out through the field, and we were bumping along out there. And it was nearing midnight, and you could see, all you could see was the moonlight filtered through the upper terraces of the trees, and the shadows and animals moving kind of through the forest, and the long limbs reaching down from the trees, kind of raking the roof of the car, like long, hands or fingernails. And then we suddenly broke out into this clearing, and there sat this old wood house on stilts. And it looked like a scene out of every bad B horror movie you've ever seen. You expected Freddy to jump out with his chainsaw or something. And when we walked in to the house, and I was unarmed, we walked in to do the deal, and nobody knew where I was, so nobody was coming to the rescue. And we walked in the door. One of them turned and put a pistol to my forehead, and the other one shoved a shotgun in my stomach. They had decided, they knew I had money on me, so they decided to keep their wares and just kill me. And so I began a long night, and they began to talk about where to bury my body after they'd killed me. And then one sat right across from me while the other one held a pistol on me on the couch. And he sat really close to me, his eyes never leaving mine. And for those of y'all who are like my age, you remember those old double-edged razor blades where you drop down in the razor and tighten it up, and it would cut the end of your finger off if you weren't careful. Well, he had one, and he took it like this. He was holding it, looking at me, and he stuck it in his mouth, and he bit down on it. And he chewed on it, and he twisted it, and he bit it in two and threw his head back, and he swallowed it. And then he looked back at me there in that dim light of that little house after midnight in the woods, and he grinned at me, and when he did, the blood bubbled up at each corner of his mouth, streamed down onto his face, and when he smiled, the blood oozed between his teeth. And he put his fingers back up in his mouth, got a handful of blood, and said, "Want some?" And I said, "I don't think I'd care for any." And then he got a full box of long stem kitchen matches, and he lit them all at once. This huge flame going. And and he put his head down, bleeding, gushing blood, head down over the flame, and he threw his head back and he swallowed all of that flame. And at that moment, my whole life flashed before my eyes. And it releases something in you when you believe you're about to die. And I saw images of myself as a toddler with my parents, things buried in your subconscious you just can't pull up. And I told people, actually, it was quite a beautiful experience, that was, but I wouldn't recommend the stimulus it took to get to it. And so I did something that night I didn't do very often. I prayed. I was a very nominal Christian, raised in a church, but totally didn't get it, totally didn't understand a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I won't tell you what all happens if you might want to read the book, but God saved me that night. He delivered me. And I got promoted later to be a topside investigator, working out of Batesville, working everything pretty much the whole Delta then. There weren't very many of us. And so I was a topside investigator from, Greenville, Cleveland area down Greenwood all the way up to the Tennessee line. And organized crime had moved out of Memphis. A big syndicate was moving into DeSoto County, and they wanted to take over DeSoto County. They had dreams of turning it into something like McNairy County was in Walking Tall, the movie. And for some of the actual real people from McNairy County were involved in that syndicate. It's kind of the Dixie Mafia, the Italian Mafia out of St. Louis, and different elements. And they came down there with a lot of money. And there was one older gangster who had decided to do that before they did. And so they just came down there. He didn't have the muscle anymore. So they came down there and muscled him, and they had everybody bought off. And so they were issuing, building code violations and all kind of stuff on him. And so he once probably would have handled them mobster to mobster, but he didn't have that kind of muscle anymore. And so one day he calls me, and he says, I can give it all to you. And so we met at midnight. Everything happened at midnight in those days, and near Memphis, and he laid it all out for me, and I said, well, let me be the instrument of your revenge. And so he laid it all out, and we did a major investigation, and one night we rolled in there. They had nightclub syndicates, a network of nightclubs set up, and the waitresses were dealing drugs table to table. The dice were loaded on the dice tables. We actually saw deputies, setting up the dice tables, and the dice were loaded, and they had juice machines in the wall, which are magnets that the dealer could hit, and he'd stop those dice where he wanted to, and then if they couldn't cheat him out of everything that way, they'd give the high sign, and they had special beers they'd bring out, and they drilled into the beers with a little jeweler's drill, and they would inject scopolamine, which was used in childbirth a lot. They would inject that into the beer and then solder back over it, and they'd give the high sign and jarring, and the jarring they called it in gambling terminology. And so they would jar the guys, and then if they still couldn't get them, then the waitresses would take them over to the little apartments on the side, kind of like they did in Walking Tall. And if they complained about it, then the friendly local sheriff's department would show up and haul them off to the drunk tank after they popped them upside the head. And so it was quite a racket and wide open there. But we rolled in there one night with a small armada sent up from Jackson, and when I walked in, they were all at one big nightclub that night, gathered. And when I walked in and announced Bureau of Narcotics, they're all under arrest, it sounded like thunder. Everybody started dropping their guns. I'm glad they didn't shoot me. But they started dropping their guns so they wouldn't be caught with them. And they were dropping their 45s and 9mm and all kind of stuff. We arrested most of the waitresses who were dealing amphetamines that night, and it really upset a lot of people. We didn't tell anybody we were coming in, and that was a new paradigm in Mississippi. And we filled up the jail that night, and then there were repercussions. I had an informant, and she called me, and she said they're meeting, and I said, what are they meeting about? Well, they're pooling their money and hiring somebody to kill you. I said, oh, they're not going to do that. I said, that'd be suicide if they killed a state police officer. I said, the wrath of the world would come down on them. And she said, no, they're serious. And after that, I got a call from a guy in Memphis. He said, I know what you did in DeSoto County. He said, but you missed some stuff, and I think you did. And he said, I can give it all. I can give the rest of it to you. And I felt bad about it. I felt funny about it. But I wanted to make that case, and I said, okay. And I said, I'll meet you in Memphis. But he wouldn't meet in Memphis. He wouldn't meet in Tate County, Senatobia. He wouldn't meet anywhere but in DeSoto, where they had political protection. The syndicate did. And so I finally agreed. He said, no, I know a place out in the woods. I said, no, we're not meeting out in the woods. And we met at the Horn Lake exit, right off of 55. There's everything there now at that exit you could want within walking distance. Then there was nothing except an abandoned Gulf service station. And so I left to go meet him, and my first wife, who's deceased now, right after I left, my informant called, and she said, is Merle there? She said, no, he's gone. She said, get a hold of him and tell him it's a setup, they're going to kill him. And then hung up. That terrified her and my wife, and she called the highway patrol, and my police radio had gone out. And so, but I eased my 9mm out of my shoulder holster and put it underneath my belt. When I got there, was not one but two there waiting, and I should have driven off. Violated a lot of stuff by not doing that. And Jim Clementi at Criminal Minds, he asked me, what were you thinking? Because he's a retired FBI agent. And I said, well, Jim, when he came to stay with us, I showed him that place at Horn Lake. I said I was young, thought I'd live forever, thought I was invincible, bullets bounce off of me and all that. And but those guys got in a car with me, which I should have never done. And it deteriorated quickly, and I knew I'd gotten myself in a bad fix. And finally it got so bad with the veiled threats and everything, I just opened my coat and put my hand on my 9mm and slipped the safety off, and I said, all right, if you hear what I think you're here for, let's get on with it. And they said, well, we've got our guns too, and one thing led to another, and I said, well, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to do it right here and right now. And I said, oh, we've got off on the wrong foot. Said, meet us back tonight. We'll have something definite for you. We'll meet you in a private place. And I said, okay, anything to get them out of my car. And then I found out, when they left, I found out about the call from my informant, and they sent up sharpshooters from Jackson. And I was a little nervous about being the bait to meet them, because I knew those guys were had a little itchy fingers. And but they called when I was on the way to Memphis, had to stop at the payphone, didn't have cell phones those days. We were meeting. They'd already called the DA, Gerald Chatham, who went on to be district judge up there. Told him that as soon as they killed me, he was next. And he was carrying a gun. That scared us all worse than the criminals, because he didn't know how to use a gun. And but they called and said they were ready to meet. And I said, I'll call you back in a little bit. And we met and got our act together. And when I called, the line was busy and busy and busy. And finally, they didn't answer. I think they got a little, scared that they were being set up. And it traced it, and it came back to the headquarters of the syndicate. And one thing led to another then, and that's all in the book. And but it got kind of rough for a while. But I did want to tell you all too that when I was promoted and became supervisor and then captain in the agency, we were doing a heroin deal. Agents had done a heroin deal down in the Golden Triangle, Columbus, Starkville, West Point. Heroin dealers had moved in down there, and they were trying to create an addict population. And what they do is they would come in with high-grade, very highly addictive heroin, pretty pure stuff. Not so pure that it would probably, sometimes people get a hold of a pure dose and they'll overdose and die on it, but it was just highly addictive. And then when they got them hooked, then they'd come in and cut the purity way down and drive the price up, and they would make a lot of money. And that was a diabolical plan, but that's what they were doing around Mississippi State and MSCW in those days, at Mississippi University for women now. And so I told the agents, well, y'all made several buys from them. Let's do this. Let's do a really big deal. and that we can't let that much money walk away. But maybe we can draw out their backers, if they have any, behind them that won't trust them with that amount of product. And so we set up a large deal, and I had to, at the last minute, rush to find a guy I used to work for when I was in college here, Mr. Schrecker, who ran the Malco theaters here in Lyric back in the old days when I worked my way through college. I knew he would have cash. I went down and got $10,000-15,000, I think it was, and from him, and for a flash roll for the agents to have. And I was in my office in Tupelo in the old TNS building. It's gone now, by the federal building, the post office. And ran downstairs to meet the agents in Starkville to set up the parameters of the deal that we would do in Columbus. And when I jumped in my car and cranked up and put my hand on the gear shift, Spirit filled up my car, wrapped all around me, all through me. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life, and it scared me to death. And said very clearly to me, go back and get the bulletproof vest. It was gone. And I'm looking around like, what was that? I'm losing my mind. Now I know it was the Holy Spirit, but then I didn't. And because no one wore a vest in those days. All police do now, but no one did then. And undercover agents especially didn't like to put them on because they were bulky, even though it was November, and kind of hard to conceal. And we only had 2 for the north half of the state, and they didn't have any armor in them. They stopped maybe a small handgun. So I said, I don't know where that came from. I'm losing my mind. Put my hand back on the gear shift, right back in the car. And it wasn't optional this time. Go back and get the vest. I said, okay. And I did. And I thought about all that all the way to Starkville. And I got there, and we set up the parameters of the deal. I said, I want you to wear these vests. And they didn't want to. And I said, well, just do it. And I said, don't humor me. I said, don't ask me why. Because I knew they weren't ready to receive it, and I didn't know I was ready to receive it, what had happened. So I said, keep the deal down, keep it in town so we can stay close to you. Because I was really nervous, as you can imagine. And cause we needed buildings to hide behind. You know, when you're out in the country doing a deal and you got surveillance, you know, the bad guys will say, hey, who are those guys down there? You know, and but we got buildings and places to hide behind, and we had body units on the agents so we could listen to them. So, but the deal got away from them. It did go out down south of Columbus, down past the W, out on this winding road. It came up on a big levee road out there with deep depressions on either side, leading off into the swamp. And that day, it was getting bitterly cold, and later that night, it came a freeze and just froze everything from Jackson to Corinth that night. And there was rolling charcoal clouds like I'd never seen before. It looked like faces forming and reforming in the sky. I mean, it was ominous. The signs were everywhere, you know, danger. So on that levee road, of course, a railroad ran right through the lowlands. So there was a high railroad trestle, and right where the railroad trestle joined in and crossed the levee road, there was a little clump of pine trees, and that's where they had the sniper posted up there with a high-powered rifle. And so the Chief of Intelligence and I are listening, and the body units are cutting in and out, and I hear them saying, good stuff, yeah, oh yeah, that's good, and let's do a test, and da-da-da-da-da, and then how much, and da-da-da-da, and then, because there's one violator there, and one, later we knew there was one perched up there on the high ground, so we'd have the advantage of shooting down at us. And so then I hear it pops off, it pops back on, and I hear agents say, Bureau of Narcotics, you're under arrest. It popped off again, and I was banging on the receiver, and about that time it popped back on, and I heard it, ta-tow. And then the radio just erupted with agents on the other side saying, Merle, they're taking fire. So we came across the levee, caught in a crossfire, gunsmoke hanging in that frigid air, just hanging over it. That place was a battleground. It looked like the intersection of heaven and hell that day. And we rolled out of the car and took cover behind the car, and the female agent, she was with a male agent, and she radioed and said, "Merle, Jerry's hit bad. I'm going to try to get him to the hospital." I told her to go. And when they arrested the guy, the violator on the scene stepped back and went in his coat to draw his weapon, and she shot him right through the wrist. Would have been the 10 ring, those of y'all who go out on the firing range. Shot him right through the wrist as he was drawing his weapon. And they took off, and then the battle continued, and finally I thought that they had all retreated, and ordered everybody to stop shooting at shadows. And so we secured the place. I left it with the chief of intelligence. I went to the hospital to check on the agent who was hit bad, and I knew the violator. One of the violators would be there because he was hit too. She had shot him. So I met the first responders on the way out, coming out to the scene. And when I got there, there was an agent there, the female agent. She was about 21, and she had just shot her first person and seen her partner shot. And she looked like she was about 80. And she was all bent over, and I tried to comfort her, and then I went in and arrested the violator who was in another room. And I walked into the ER, and when I walked into the ER, my friend Jerry, one of my agents, was lying there on the table, and they were cutting his clothes off of him. And that white bulletproof vest that God had sent me back to get was now crimson soaked in blood. And the doctor had his hand up in one of the entry wounds, and he said, "Merle, look at this." He said, "One round hit him in his lower extremities, another one sliced through his right arm, and this one punched him right in the chest." He said it penetrated the vest because it wasn't designed to stop a high-powered rifle, but it deflected it. It went in behind his right breast, skidded around the barrel of his rib cage, and popped out behind his left breast. He said, "Merle, if he hadn't had that vest on, taking out his heart and lungs, he'd been dead before he hit the ground." I still get chill bumps. It's been a long time, since that happened, about 42 years since that happened. I still get chill bumps telling that story. But I want to tell you, all that night, you could almost feel the shuffle of angels' feet all around us. And that murmuring started. It's like those things, you begin to hear that still small voice, and it's like you look at somebody and say, "Excuse me, did you say something to me?" And no, they didn't. But it's the veil thinning out, and it grew louder and louder in my life. So I knew we weren't alone. I still didn't understand it. So I doubled down on my works-based salvation mode I was in. Well, I got to really be good, and so I can get in. They'll let me in, if I'm really good and true. And of course, it doesn't work that way. And I wound up, I don't have time to tell you all about it. It's all in the books. I wound up investigating a corrupt governor, tried to corrupt our agency, tampered with my witnesses when I was doing internal affairs investigation. I had to threaten to resign. Investigating a man who had abused a lot of young teenage girls. And it wasn't pretty. And threatened to resign and give it all to the media if they didn't do what was right. And so we won that battle, but then they came after me and started wiretapping our phones. The chief of intelligence and we had scramblers. They were primitive by what they have today, but we would call, say, like Delta 9, and we would put a receiver into a little box, pick it up, and dial D9, and it would scramble our conversations because we knew we were being wiretapped by people in government. They had wiretap specialists in Jackson who were running around wiretapping people, and they had badges. But they were like a lot of people I met in life. They made Faustian deals and sold their soul to rule in hell on earth rather than to serve eternally in heaven. And people say, "Well, I know that kind of stuff goes on." I said, "Sure it goes on. It still goes on, except it's probably worse now. You turn on the nightly news, you get an inkling of it." So finally I had to leave. It became untenable, and they were punishing my agents. So I left, and Bell Security offered me a job. I went into Bell Security. crossed over and began to work my way up through the old Bell system and into Bell South and everything. Got into politics, lost my mind, but I was still a crusader and wanted to pick whoever I thought was, the best candidate. And I wound up, I met a lot of people, and I was President Reagan's State Criminal Justice Chairman of Mississippi in 1980, and met Margaret Thatcher, and just a whole slew of people names who a lot of you would know. But that was a tough world, and I found out that the political criminals that I encountered were far more dangerous than the organized crime figures who tried to kill me, because of in what I call the unholy trinity of politics, crime, and business. And because they had the full power of government to bring against you. So I was in Georgia, and the congressman asked me to secretly, of course it got out, but to help this challenger running against a powerful incumbent, a corrupt incumbent. And he said, we'll help you, but we need you. We know you. If it gets out that you're helping her, then people will give money to her. So I charged off into it, put on my shield and sword, and rode off to win the day. And then it did get out, and the incumbent called me at my house one night late and to curse me and threaten me. And he told me, he said, I'm going to run that woman that you're backing. I'm going to run her out of the state of Georgia. I'm going to break up her family. I'm going to destroy her. Destroy her. You hear me? Destroy her. Then when that ended, the editor of the daily newspaper called me. He said, what are you doing? What are you doing? So we want you to stop this immediately. He's our guy. He brings home the bacon to us. He brings home the money to our billionaire publisher. And they said, we've been very kind to you in our newspaper. That's why one reason everybody around here knows you in this area is because we've been very kind to you. And he said, we made you, and we can break you. And I asked, what about truth, justice, and American way? He said, no, not justice, Merle, just us. That's a metaphor for the times we live in now. Well, I doubled down. I didn't back off. I doubled down. And they call it the biggest upset in Georgia in 50 years. But then they came after me again. It's a recurring theme in my life. And they went to my superiors in Atlanta, who had given me every award that the company had to give somebody in my department, and told me I was their top-rated manager for 12 straight years. But none of that mattered, because they said no legislation moves until you punish him and you mute him and you neuter him. And so they called me into Atlanta, and it was brutal. They said, who do you think you are? You're not God. Right and wrong? What's that? And it was really brutal. And so I demanded a severance package and early retirement and left, shocked everybody. And then I was my congressman was trying to get me appointed as U.S. Marshal. A U.S. Senator who was a friend of mine and a nice guy, one of the nicest guys. You don't meet a whole lot of really nice guys in Washington, but he was. He had a sudden aneurysm at 62 and he died. He would have guaranteed in the new administration coming in that I would have been appointed U.S. Marshal for South Georgia. But he died, and it fell into fighting. And the other congressmen, they didn't want a guy who had just gone after an incumbent. For after all, they were incumbents. And then I was offered a job as deputy superintendent of education. And because I'd been a well-known education reform activist, and I was the chamber education chairman, and served on a national panel and so forth. And so I took it, and I went to Atlanta. My first wife was very ill, and I should have just taken off and stayed with her, but I wanted one last great battle. I wanted to go slay the dragons one more time, but what I didn't know was the dragons in Atlanta waiting for me were bigger and nastier than any I had ever encountered, and they were just waiting to gobble me up. And when I got to the Department of Education, they were locked in, the superintendent was of one party, she was locked in a battle with the governor of another party. And they were trying to steal our education dollars coming from Washington, because we just had money like you wouldn't believe. And we were the only legal recipient of federal education funds. They wanted to steal those education funds to build a shadow government. This governor viewed himself as kind of like, I don't know, some from down in Louisiana in their past, all powerful, and they were appointing people to circumvent elected positions, and they were trying to buy judges, and people were calling us all the time because there was nobody else to go to, and telling us things that they were doing that were illegal, and we had to sweep our phones in the Department of Education. Thought they were tapped. They had a mole. One of the other deputies was bought off by them. He was a mole reporting on everything back to the governor, and we did. And then a retired state trooper met with us and said, look, he said, y'all need to be very careful. He said, if y'all are out on the campaign trail, because my boss was wanting to run for governor, said the word has gone out in the state trooper huts. If they find y'all out on the road, they're to stop you, fine you, arrest you, hurt you. Now, would every state trooper do that? Certainly not. But there are some who would, to curry favor with the power. There's always that element, those bad apples in every barrel. And so that was the environment we were working in, and we were surrounded, and neither party would step up to help us. Republicans wouldn't help us. And then we get a call from Washington, from a friend in the White House, and said the White House had just thrown y'all right under the bus. They're going to allow the governor, they're going to circumvent y'all and the U.S. Department of Education. The Assistant U.S. Secretary of Education, in presence of Rod Page, the U.S. Secretary of Education, had told me to hold firm. Don't you let anybody divert any money, we'll prosecute them. And I said, okay. And then I get a conference call that called me and said, the conference call waiting on you. I said, what conference call? And she plugged me in, and these politicos from the White House and K Street, where all the lobbyists are, and some in Congress, they were on there. So I just want to tell you, we're going to let the governor divert, steal, have all the money he wants. I said, what? I said, that's against the Constitution. It's illegal. And I said, what about Secretary Page and the Assistant Secretary? They said they're not available to you anymore. They won't return your calls anymore. And they wouldn't, because they'd been told to stand down. And so then we get that word, and we go around trying to get money away from them by getting grants out to local school systems before they can steal it, and one thing and another. And then my boss ran and lost the election for governor. And then a strange thing happened to the last of the Boy Scouts. They indicted us. They said she took money from a vendor that they said some of it found its way into her campaign donations they had made, and that was a conflict, and so on and so on. And we walked right into that. And so everybody who had conspired to divert tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, that was okay, because it was sanctioned by the powers. But these little small donations and small contracts suddenly was, oh, we can't let this go. And so they show up, and it's one of those at times when you just can't believe it, that this has happened, and nobody else could believe it either when the word got out that the last of the Boy Scouts had been indicted. And my wife was very ill at that time, and I'd been her caregiver for a long, long time. And I didn't know what I was going to do and what would happen. And I told the superintendent, I said, well, I said, we may think we didn't do anything wrong, but I said, they've got the laws and they've got a 96, 97, 98% conviction rate. Because on the feds, nobody, a lot of people plead out because they just think they don't have any chance. Believe me when I tell y'all, there are federal laws on the book right now. They could come in here and find something to indict almost anybody in this room on. They selectively pull them up when they want to go after people who are in their way. That's how the game is played. So many people don't know the game in Washington, and fewer still know the rules to that game. And I learned it the hard way. And so I told her I was going to plead, and I said, I don't know what my wife will do if I go away. And I said, but I'll tell the truth on the stand. If I'm called, I won't lie. And so when I told her that, then the federal prosecutors said any deal was off with you, and they'd lock me up so I couldn't testify, and turned the whole tables around, knowing what really happened, to paint me as the bad guy. And they threw me in a dungeon in Atlanta Correctional Detention Center, and it was a rough place. I mean, a rough place. They wouldn't even let me out with anybody else to take showers or have a recreational break because I was so high profile in the papers in Atlanta Constitution. They were afraid they'd kill me. And I mean, there were some really rough guys in there. And it was harder and more horrible than I can tell y'all it was. But then somebody showed up, and through the little slot in the door, they put a Bible. If I could find them now, I'd kiss them, maybe on the lips. And I began to read the Bible like I'd never read before. And, I began to understand. And then I went down on my knees, and God broke me. He broke me all the way down to the ground. And right at that moment, they had never seen me in there, the inmates. They began to come to my door when they would get out and sit in the floor and look through the little slot in the door and look at me and confess murder, heinous things I can't even talk about. And I don't understand. And I didn't know if they were looking for absolution or forgiveness. I mean, I'd just been broken. I mean, I didn't know what this was. And then I asked Lord, what is this? I don't understand. I don't understand. And he showed me. He said, you've always put your hand down, a helping hand to lift people up. He said, now I'm going to bring you down into a world you would have never known, that you might understand Christ and his coming down to save humankind. And everything began to change, and I got out on a second bail against all odds. Nobody believed that was possible. The federal prosecutor was so enraged, agents had to restrain him in a courtroom, and a judge was threatened to hold him in contempt because it's very personal. I had embarrassed him because he was waiting on an appointment from the President of the United States as a federal magistrate, and I almost ruined that for him, he thought. And so, I mean, it's like a novel, but you don't have, it's truth is stranger than fiction. And so I had to leave, and they decided to make it an example of me. So rather than me probably getting no time, probation or something if I had played ball with them, they gave me 8 years. 8 years in prison. And hardest thing I ever had to do was the day I left my wife in the care of nurses and left her alone. And when I got to federal prison in Edgefield, that was a dungeon. You know, you don't ever get used to being strip searched. I mean, really strip searched. And people were waiting on me there. Some of the staff and some of the inmates too had my picture up on a bulletin board. They were going to show me I was nothing anymore. And But I learned something. Razor wire and fences can't keep the Lord out. He was right there in the midst of all of that, walking between the rows of the beds, and it was hard, so hard. And then one day, my wife died. A few months after I went in, and the nurse has been bringing her to see me on visitation, and she died, and they wouldn't let me go see her. It was give me anybody to escort me to say goodbye at the funeral, only 30 minutes away, but they were still punishing me. Even the federal judge in Atlanta ordered them to take me. They appealed it to the Court of Appeals, knowing they'd run out the clock, just to get. Somebody still wanted me screwed into the ground, and that's how it works. And but I was lying in my bunk one day, feeling really sorry for myself, wondering how this had happened, and curled up in a fetal position, my little earbuds on. On a good day, we could get a distant Christian radio station, but that day was nothing but roaring static, and I didn't care. It was blotting out that existence, and I was lying there, and all of a sudden that static broke, and the transmission was so loud it jarred my ears and my head, and a voice I had never heard before, and I never heard again, and I'd heard every radio pastor there was, said, "You there. You there." It was so direct, I sat up in my bunk. He said, "Yes, I'm talking to you. It's not noble what you're doing, lying there, wallowing in your bed of pity. Now you get up from there and you get about your Father's business." And then it was gone. And I did. I got up and got about my Father's business. And he showed me that he wanted me to start an inmate-led Christian ministry based on Christian movies, because I didn't even know there were any back then. And everybody was against us, but he made a way. And that became the biggest thing on the compound. It still goes on today, 10, 12 years later. It still goes on today, and it's bigger than ever. And we packed that out. Men who would never darken the door of a church, would never pick up a Bible, they would come to watch movies because they understood movies. And we were getting them in. Friends were pouring them in to me. And I had somebody on the inside, an official, helping me. And when you're sitting there in the dark and you hear these big, tough men start crying, and their hearts open to the approach of the Holy Spirit, well, it doesn't get any better than that. And men were coming to Christ. It was a God. It wasn't me. I was just a tool and a vessel. And many other things happened I don't have time to tell you about, but I was transferred to Millington. I got asked for transfer and went to Millington, started it all over again, same thing, became a pastor, inmate pastor, and movie nights. And the gangs came after me because I was leading people away from the gangs that ran those places. And they threatened my life. And there was nights, I'll tell y'all, I went to sleep clutching that little cross around my neck. I didn't know if I was going to live to see daylight. And because some of the guards, not all of them, but some, were on their payroll. And other thing they do is they'd come in and slide a cell phone up under your bunk, which was illegal to have, and then they'd call their friendly guard. He'd come down, "Oh, hey, what's this?" And they throw you in the hole, and then they ship you to a facility in the desert in Arizona where you'd never get another visit. Or they'd put you in what they call diesel therapy if they couldn't break you. They'd wake you up in the night, put you on a bus, and they would literally ride you all over America. That's what they do. And a lot of this stuff I testified to the Chuck Colson Task Force on Federal Corrections Reform. And so they tried a lot of stuff like that. And then so many things happened. And Judy, my wife, came to see me. I'd known her in high school. She was best friends with my wife. Her husband had died. And the Lord led us back together. And we were married there in Millington in the visiting room. Only God can do those things. And they even tried to ruin our marriage ceremony. Some of the officials did because they hated me so much. And a lot of the hate you see now on TV and the screaming people, I saw a lot of that back then. in their faces. And I transferred to Talladega to finish up my time and to get out a little early. I wound up serving about 5.5 years, but made so many friends and saw so many miracles on the inside. You just wouldn't believe the things that happened, and the people that we returned kindness to for hate. We returned their hate with kindness and trying desperately to be more like Jesus. And we forgive them, and you're never more like Jesus than when you forgive. And but when the day I left and Judy came to get me, a funny thing, because everybody knew I liked Elvis music, and when I walked out the front door, there were 2 facilities, one down here and one up on the hill, and there were some pretty rough places. And the officer there hit the mic, and it went all over the compound, up and down the hill, and it said, "Elvis has left the building." And so then I had been writing on the first book while I was inside, and then that began to come together, and everything began to flow from that. But being on the inside in that, what I call that monastery, God turned off the noise of the world. He said, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" I said, "Yes, Lord, I hear you now." And Scripture I thought I understood. I found out I didn't understand it all. And the Holy Spirit began to draw close to me. And the first time it happened, I didn't ever want it to end. And then I thought, well, what was I doing? What was I thinking? What was I wearing? It sounds funny now, but you want it to never stop. You want him to come back. And but so many things happened, and everything really changed when I prayed. And when I stopped praying, "Get me out of here, Lord, get me out of here," for deliverance. And I prayed and could mean it finally. "Lord, just show me your threads of good and purpose woven into these crushing blankets of pain, that I might understand and be a better servant of Jesus Christ." Wow. Wow. It was just like, it was more than my senses, my puny little mind and heart could absorb what he began to show me. And it's been that way since we came home and been out on the road, and we encounter people and we see miracles all the time. People come up to me, it looks like they've been hit upside the head with a baseball bat, and they say, "I think God just told me I'm supposed to help you." I say, "Oh, it's okay, it happens all the time." And they'll get us into schools and into churches and on TV and radio and book signings and it's just like that all the time. And people call and say, "What can I do? What can I do? How can I help your ministry?" And we see true miracles. If I had time to tell you about all of them, I tell you would weep to hear some of these things. And people that come up to us and tell us. I was in Utah, Alabama. Didn't know why God was sending me there. I was coming back from Florida. Was getting to be sick. Went to Montgomery. Sick with Hashimoto's I've been battling. And we signed up, booked $1 million. And then they had asked me, "We'd heard about you. Can you come through Utah, Alabama? Anybody ever been there? You have to want to go to Utah to find it." But there's a lot of old antebellum homes there and churches that are on a historic national register, been there over 200 years. So we get there and we walk into this cultural center. It was one of these old churches that had been converted. And when I walked in and opened the door, it's like, you knew you were on holy ground. It just, the wave, just washed over me. And you could feel the residuals and the echoes of generations and generations of people who had worshiped there and prayed there and cried there, born there, died there, married there. And their collective cries to their Creator. It was, I wish you could experience those things. And then I looked, and they had a pulpit that rose up and went like all the way up to the high ceiling almost. If y'all ever saw that old movie, classic movie, Sergeant York, with Gary Cooper, it looked like when Walter Brennan was up on that high pulpit, when he was preaching down at Sergeant York at Gary Cooper when he was saved that night. And if you've never seen that old movie, you ought to go back and see it. And everybody was singing Rock of Ages. And That's what it felt like. And I got up there, and they had a Bible like this big there, giant Bible. And I was looking as people were coming in, and I began to talk, and I didn't even think about the books anymore. We thought we'd say more books than we could ever possibly sign in Utah, Alabama. Well, we signed every book in the car and had to fill more of a mail order. But I looked down when I was talking. I don't remember what I was saying, and the Lord just took over. And I looked down, and there's a man weeping down there, and then just all lined up to get signed books. And the man came up, and he was a reporter, an older man, and he said 2 years ago they gave me like 60 days to live. And he said, they say now I'm a miracle, but they won't believe me. They won't believe me that Jesus came to me in my hospital room and said, it's not your time. I can't tell you how many people I've encountered who've gotten that message, it's not your time. If I had time to tell you about them, I would. And he said, nobody understands. Nobody understands. He said, but you. He said, but you understand. I said, yes, sir, I do. And I'm crying. And when we left, I didn't want to leave then. I got in the car to drive 2.5 hours to Tupelo that night. And I said, Judy, when will I ever learn? If the Lord is sending me somewhere, there's a reason. It's not mine to question it. And we got to the house, and we were exhausted. And I said, Judy, I'm going to check Facebook, see if anybody had been looking for me before we collapsed in bed. And I logged on. And those sweet people down in Utah, Alabama, had been on Facebook. And they just made one post, and they said, Utah, Alabama, loves Merle Temple. The hand of God is on him. I sat there and cried again, that God can use somebody as pitiful and frail a vessel as I am. And so many stories I wish I could tell you. I know y'all need to get home to your families. But I appreciate you having me here. And all these stories are fleshed out and contained in the books, and the miracles and the things there. I think you'd find these books things you'd want to pass down to your children and grandchildren. And we've gotten so many letters like that. And the only thing we do with the books is certainly not about fame and fortune. And at my age, we plow everything back into buying more books, seed more books, get the message out to people like the pastor, the missionary in Nigeria, who just wrote me and said, I read all your books. God bless you for the hard work and the detail and your service to Christ. Can't wait for your next one. And a lady just wrote me from Oregon last week to say she waits on her son. He's totally dependent on her. He can't move, he can't turn, he can't do anything. She said, today was a good day. We got him out on the patio in the sunlight to read to him from your book, Deputy. You just sit there and you cry. And I always say, I don't know why God loves me so much, but I sure am glad that he does. And I got lost in the dark woods for a while of the world, wandering and didn't see any way out, and then there was the lighthouse, like the old hymn, if not for the lighthouse, where would this ship be? And the Lord took my hand, and he walked me out of the darkness, and he walked me to the light. And suddenly I was taller than the trees, and I could see all the way from the drug wars to the corporate wars, to prison, to Hollywood, and to right here tonight with y'all in Saltillo at Northstar. And I'll tell you, despite everything I've been through, I'll tell you, I got nothing in life that I asked for, but I got everything that I could have hoped for. And among men, I count myself most blessed. Thank y'all, and God bless you. And if y'all don't mind, I think he's asked me if I'd close us out on a little prayer, if y'all don't mind. And Lord, thank you for this night. Thank you for these good folks that came out here tonight. I hope something that I have said is glory to you and all that you have made possible and continue to make possible for all of us as we serve you here and strive to be in this world but not of this world, and to make a difference for you, and pray that we all, when we leave this world, that they will say of us in our obituaries, they were just all used up for Jesus Christ. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you.